They are so broke. Financially, the couple are a laughingstock in Montecito. A really good example of how financially challenged they are. It's almost unheard of to buy a house in Montecito and just move into it, right? You buy a house and you do like a $7 million remodeling job, right? To make it all up to date. You don't take the sort of, we've seen the insides of the house. Yep. It's hideous. It's absolutely hideous.
Meghan Markle dropped an astrology post this week saying the last 7 years have been the hardest stretch of her life. The message she highlighted talked about the struggle of being misunderstood, like the world refuses to see who you really are and how draining that can get over time. That didn't sit well with a lot of people, former staff who worked with her and reportedly needed therapy after. Plus, journalists deep in the Sussex drama and even the British public reacted with a mix of disbelief and straight-up frustration. Recent polls already show where public opinion stands, and this just added more tension. Here's what actually went down. Meghan shared a reading from a Las Vegas astrologer who calls herself a ride-or-die astrologer, aimed at Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, which, realistically, covers about a quarter of the world's population. The reading claimed these signs were finally wrapping up the toughest 7 years of their lives as of April 25th. It talked about confidence getting knocked for no reason, people doubting their path, their spotlight, even their worth, and promised relief was finally coming. Then the astrologer doubled down after Meghan reposted it. She called Meghan the Queen with a capital Q and said she's living proof of this whole cosmic shift, even hinting at her reign making a comeback. Sure, astrology means a lot to some people, and sharing it isn't unusual. But this moment hit differently for a lot of observers.
Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius ending the hardest 7 years of their lives on April 25th. The tension between who you actually are and what the world around you was willing to see has been exhausting in a way that is hard to explain to people who have not lived it. Your confidence took hits it had no business taking. You questioned your creative direction, your spotlight, your worth. April 25th, the pressure lifts. You get the space to just exist without fighting for its spirit daughter. And this astrologer in question, Christina Antuna, very Meghan Markle-like. She describes herself as your ride or die astrologer, Las Vegas based.
The issue isn't astrology itself. It's how that 7 years of struggle message was framed and pushed out by someone with Meghan's level of influence. That hits differently when people who worked closely around her are still dealing with what they say those years actually cost them. The so-called Sussex Survivors Club, a nickname for former staff who left under tough conditions, has started speaking up again. And this post set them off. What they're sharing through journalists isn't just anger, it's more like disbelief. These are people who, based on multiple reports, walked away from those roles seriously shaken. Some needed therapy, others needed deeper mental health support, and a few say their careers took a real hit after the experience. There are claims that confidence was slowly broken down over time, with repeated treatment that left lasting damage. According to documented communications, certain individuals were singled out and pushed out, which makes this way more than just bitter complaints from ex-staff. Jason Knopf, who worked as communications secretary for Harry and Meghan, even sent a formal email to Simon Case, raising direct concerns about Meghan's treatment of staff. That message, which is on record, described behavior he clearly labeled as bullying, naming specific people and detailing incidents. This isn't random gossip floating around online. It's a written complaint from one senior official to another, laying out serious concerns he believed needed to be officially documented.
Really? True suffering? The past 7 years? And she added there is an argument for not caring what the world thinks, and perhaps especially what spirit daughter thinks, and for not even trying to explain how exhausted you are. However, driven by curiosity, I've looked back over what exactly Meghan has been up to for the past 7 years, and honestly, it's extraordinary. At pretty much every turn, she's got exactly what she wanted. Why on earth is...
With all that in the background, Meghan pushing a message about living through the hardest 7 years doesn't just come off awkward. It flips the narrative in a way that people on the other side of those same years find hard to ignore. For them, it feels like reality has been turned upside down, and the reaction has been intense. Hilary Rose from The Times broke it down bluntly. She revisited what Meghan's last 7 years actually looked like and pointed out something striking. At nearly every major moment, she got what she was aiming for. A royal wedding watched across the globe, massive media deals, a memoir, high-paying speaking gigs, a luxury lifestyle brand, and that Montecito mansion. This isn't exactly a typical struggle story. That's why the hardest years claim raises eyebrows. It either depends on a very narrow definition of hardship or a complete rethink of what most people go through when life gets tough. Now, to be fair, that doesn't mean Meghan faced zero challenges. The media coverage could be harsh, sometimes crossing the line, and the racist angles in certain headlines were real and unacceptable. On top of that, royal life came with strict rules that many would find suffocating. But here's where the gap becomes impossible to ignore.
I cannot quite figure out how to get there. For anyone who has ever forgotten just how amazing they really are, perhaps some of Meghan's former courtiers, who call themselves the Sussex Survivors Club, will read it and think, yes, that reminds us of her. Perhaps they'll even repent. Or Meghan, they might think how she suffered, emerging only now from 7 unendurable years. Then again, maybe they won't. Well, Tom Sykes, you know the answer to that.
Experiencing those issues while backed by massive resources, global influence, and huge financial deals is a completely different reality compared to people who say they needed serious mental health support after working in that same environment. That contrast is what's making people react so strongly. And then there's that widely shared death stare clip from the Australia tour. It adds a whole new visual layer to the conversation. In it, Meghan's head of staff, Sarah Frasmo, a seasoned professional, lightly taps Harry to guide him toward people waiting nearby. In any packed public event, that kind of staff guidance is completely normal. It's basic coordination, nothing unusual at all. But Meghan's reaction, caught clearly on camera, told a different story. The look she gave, often called a death stare, was intense and aimed straight at the staff member who had just tapped Harry. That moment didn't go unnoticed, and it quickly started making rounds online. For the so-called Sussex Survivors Club, this clip didn't shock them at all. People who worked in that environment say it actually lines up with what they've been describing for years. They see it as confirmation of behavior they experienced firsthand, something that has consistently been pushed back on by the Sussex communications team.
Incredibly offensive, as you say, to people who have been left genuinely traumatized by working for her. And the problem is, right, is that when journalists, we pick up the phone and we speak to former staff who've worked with her, and they tell us horrendous stories of how she's a demon boss, or she's the psycho, or she's the dictator in high heels, or she screamed at them and belittled them and undermined them. As the Sussexes will always say, this is completely made up. You are not naming, this is what they were saying to me, you're not naming the sources. It's all rubbish.
Now, there's a serious label that's been mentioned by a former staff member in talks with journalists, and it needs careful handling. The term workplace psychopath isn't something to throw around lightly. In a clinical sense, it refers to a pattern where someone can appear warm and polished in public, but act very differently behind closed doors. It can involve strategically undermining certain individuals, pushing them out, and showing limited genuine empathy while still being able to perform it convincingly. That's a heavy claim, and no journalist or commentator can officially make that diagnosis. What can be looked at, though, is the pattern described by multiple sources. The contrast between public charm and private behavior, the focus on specific staff members, and even that documented bullying complaint. All of it lines up in a way that keeps the conversation going. And when you add in that viral death stare moment, plus years of accounts from people with no clear reason to make things up, it starts carrying more weight than simple denials. Now, shifting focus, the financial side of the Montecito setup brings its own set of questions. The Montecito house, bought for around $14 million, is raising eyebrows for a different reason. Reports say it's tied to multiple mortgages, and strangely, it hasn't been upgraded the way homes in that price range usually are in that area. In Montecito, Dropping that kind of money almost always means major renovations right after buying. But from what's been seen in Sussex content, the interiors don't match the level people expect at that price point. Observers familiar with that market say it looks under-updated, which is not what you typically see in that neighborhood. The speculation? The renovation budget might not be there. And that connects to bigger financial questions raised in reports like Dan Wakeford's investigation. Claims about inheritance money being used up, rising legal costs, and income streams not hitting expected levels. There's even a phrase floating around locally, being the poorest rich people in the room. And it sticks because it hints at something deeper going on. The lifestyle looks extremely high-end on the surface, no doubt about that. They've got the massive house, a security setup costing millions every year, and a public image built on luxury and global status. But according to multiple sources, the gap between what it costs to maintain that image and what's actually coming in is getting wider. Talk of a shrinking financial runway, high ongoing expenses, and pressure to keep everything running adds another layer to the story.
Cookie's worked for the Gates Foundation, not by any means a place that traditionally shadowing snowflakes go and work at. You know, Sarah's a pretty tough cookie. She goes and taps on Harry's shoulder to point him to some people who are up on the balcony, and gives her the most unbelievable death stare you've ever seen in your life. And the people saying, who just said, you know, that's absolutely classic Meghan, this kind of, this kind of one face for the public and then another face, yeah, there it is. I mean, incredible.
Now shifting gears, the latest polling data brings a whole new angle. A recent YouGov survey shows 64% of people in Britain still support the monarchy. And that number hasn't moved at all since January, despite months packed with headlines and controversy. Major events, ongoing royal issues, and constant public debate haven't shifted that core support. It's steady at 64%. But when you zoom in on individual approval ratings, that's where things start to get more complicated. William is sitting at 76%, Catherine close behind at 75%, Anne at 70%, and Charles holding 60%. Then, there's Camilla, up 7 points to 42%, which is a serious jump compared to her usual numbers. That boost didn't come out of nowhere. The state visit clearly worked in her favor, and those New York moments, like the Sarah Jessica Parker appearance and that Anna Wintour sunglasses clip, landed well with the public. The overall vibe felt warm, and people responded to it. Now look at the other side. Harry is at 30%, Meghan at 20%, and Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor down at just 3%. That Harry number hits harder when you remember where he used to be.
Still can't help herself. Just imagine how she acts behind the scenes. And of course, look, we both know, because we have spoken to members of the Sussex Survivors Club over the years, that it is truly horrible behind the scenes, that she does drive people to tears regularly behind the scenes. So I don't know, the problem she's got, Tom, this attempt to constantly make herself the victim is going to keep encouraging people that she has treated terribly.
At his peak, Harry wasn't just popular, he was one of the most loved royals out there. There were times his approval ratings even beat the late Queen's. He had that image of the relatable prince, the one who served in the military, built the Invictus Games, and connected with people in a way that felt real. Dropping from around 80% or higher down to 30% is massive. That's about a 50-point scoot. And what makes it even more striking is that this didn't come from one huge scandal or legal issue. It was a slow slide, built over years of decisions that kept adding up.
About unlawful information gathering, David Sherborne made the point that unlawful information gathering is, by its nature, unlawful and covert. So if you can find a small example of it, that should be taken seriously as an indication that there is more of it. Well, you can apply exactly the same rationale to workplace bullying. On the second point that you made, Dan, about, I think that's a really interesting idea about how the Kardashians have been incredibly authentic to their true selves. And I think if Meghan actually lent in to being a bit of a B1 TCH and lent in to an amazing reality show of her screaming at her aides, "Get me a bloody project that works, you idiots!" And, it would be an amazing show and we'd all love it.
Now people are starting to seriously ask, can he turn it around? That question isn't being laughed off anymore. There are still pieces in place that matter. Old army friends who stuck by him, the Invictus community that respects what he built, and a portion of the public that still remembers the version of Harry they once connected with. Those are rare advantages in a situation like this. The climb back is steep, no doubt, but it's not impossible. And here's the key point. Real change wouldn't just be about better speeches or a sharper PR strategy. It would have to go deeper than that. What would actually need to change goes way deeper than surface-level fixes. It's the core setup of Harry's life. The business deals, the ongoing grievance narrative, his relationship with Meghan, and that continued framing of himself as a victim of the institution. The big question is whether any of that can really shift while everything else stays the same. And honestly, most observers can't answer that with real confidence. What's clear is that the current approach, the 7 hardest years message, the speeches about being the world's most trolled person, and the repeated victim narrative isn't helping rebuild public trust. If anything, it's locking in the exact image the public has already pushed back on. The numbers tell that story loud and clear. 30% for Harry, 20% for Meghan. While the late Queen still holds around 81% approval after decades of steady service. That contrast speaks for itself, and no astrology post is going to change that math. Meanwhile, the criticism hasn't faded away. The Sussex Survivors Club voices are still being heard, the Jason Knopf email is still on record, and that viral death stare clip is still making the rounds. Even the Montecito house, still not fully updated, keeps fueling talk about financial pressure behind the scenes, despite the polished image being presented. And that 7 hardest years claim?
Arrow passed to the throne and a rapidly dwindling reputation. He's perfectly positioned to become the first openly bisexual royal. The timing feels right. Why not lean into it, Harry? Now, look, I'm not making any suggestion about Harry's sexuality, but what I am suggesting, Tom, is it's quite inappropriate for someone who views themselves as a member of the British royal family to slap a man on the bottom during a public engagement. I mean, that's not very royal, Tom Sykes, I would argue.
It didn't bring sympathy from those who saw things differently. It triggered the opposite reaction. The idea that pressure suddenly disappeared on April 25th just doesn't match reality. The current setup depends on constant attention, constant deals, and constant visibility. And that kind of system doesn't allow things to simply settle down. The astrologer's call doesn't line up with what people are seeing. The pressure hasn't magically disappeared, and the people who understand that pressure the most aren't the ones posting about the hardest 7 years. They're the ones who walked away from that environment, some in a really bad state, watching this narrative unfold with clear disbelief. Now, looking closer at that astrology post, it wasn't random, not even close. Meghan's content is known to be carefully planned, timed, and aimed at a specific reaction. So the real question is, what was this post trying to do, and did it actually work? One obvious angle is that it was meant to build sympathy, to present Meghan as someone who has struggled, who relates to hardship, and who can connect with people going through tough times. That fits with the wider communication style that leans heavily on a victim narrative. But here's where it gets tricky. The exact audience that message seems aimed at, people dealing with real long-term struggles, are also the ones most likely to reject it. For many, comparing those experiences to someone living with extreme privilege just doesn't land well, especially when that privilege isn't acknowledged. There's also another possible layer.
Make that magazine a propagandist for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle too. Now he's independent, so he's sort of turned a little bit. But what he says Meghan and Harry should do...
Some see the post as a subtle signal within her personal life, possibly tied to tension in her marriage. A way of expressing how she views the past 7 years, but doing it publicly instead of privately. Either way, the reaction shows this move didn't land smoothly. and it's only added more intensity to an already heated conversation. That reading is more speculative, but one detail stands out. In the astrologer's follow-up, she mentioned your job, a spouse, or even your faith as things that may have tested people. And if Harry saw that, especially with ongoing reports of marriage tension, the message could feel pretty uncomfortable. Because then Meghan isn't just talking about hardship in general. She's publicly linking the past 7 years to something or someone close to home. And spouse is not a small word to drop. Whether Harry took it that way, nobody can know. But whether he could have taken it that way is another matter. The third reading is the most cynical, but maybe the sharpest. The post may have helped create a news cycle right during the state visit, keeping the Sussex name floating around while the working royals were getting unusually positive coverage. That fits a pattern many critics point to: Sussex headlines appearing during strong royal moments. It doesn't even mean everything was calculated step by step. The habit of staying in the conversation may now be automatic. Whatever the intent, the result is messy. Instead of sympathy, the post sparked talk about the gap between Meghan's claimed suffering and the documented accounts from people who worked for her. And that does not help the Sussex brand.
Reporting on Harry and Meghan's career crisis, here is my honest assessment of what they should do next. And it's not what they want to hear. They need to disappear. Not forever, but strategically. The constant visibility is not helping them build brand equity. It's chipping away from it with every joint appearance and crazy royal tour. There needs to be scarcity, and when they come back, they need to come back separately. Meghan's path is actually clearer than the noise suggests. Stop the lifestyle positioning, stop the food products, stop standing slightly behind a man who also is struggling to define himself. Meghan was a compelling screen presence, and the world has simply forgotten that.
Now, Harry's possible rehabilitation needs a closer look, because people are getting it wrong from both sides. It's not as simple as him returning to Britain, saying sorry, and being welcomed back. What Harry has put out into the world, the memoir, the Oprah interview, the Netflix series, and the repeated public criticism of William and Charles, has had real impact. These weren't small moments. They affected people who once had a close relationship with him, and that damage doesn't just disappear. Fixing that kind of fallout isn't something that can be handled with a quick statement or a staged photo. It takes something deeper, a real acknowledgement of what the past 5 years have caused, naming specific harm instead of vague apologies, and showing change that actually lasts, not just for headlines, but over time. At the same time, some people go too far in the opposite direction by saying there's no way back at all. That's not quite right either. Public opinion can be tough, but it isn't frozen forever. There's room for forgiveness, but only when it feels earned, not forced. That 30% approval rating isn't necessarily the endpoint. The people who once supported Harry in huge numbers are still out there. The respect tied to Invictus, his military background, and the genuine connection he used to have with people, that didn't vanish completely. It's just been buried under years of decisions that pushed people away. And while digging out from that is hard, slow, and comes with a cost, it's not out of reach. But it won't come from better messaging alone. It would take a major shift in how he lives, moving away from constant commercial pressure and towards something more grounded and honest about what those years really involved. For anything to truly change, those public attacks on the royal family would have to stop. And not because a PR team says so, but because Harry himself decides it's time. That kind of shift has to come from him directly, or it won't feel real.
You can tell that he's new to independent media because you can still hear his baby in the background, and he hasn't got himself a proper camera yet. But we'll give him some lessons.
People quite like that, though, don't they? People quite like that.
At the beginning, they do. After a while, they get a bit sick of it. Wow, yeah. I mean, look, he's right. It's funny enough. As I said, I was talking to this person this morning, and I was saying the same thing. I was saying, she needs to do nothing for I said my diagnosis of it was they need to both do nothing for a year or two. Harry needs to write a fantastic book, potentially about Princess Diana. I think would be an amazing book that he could write.
Now here's where it gets complicated. Multiple reports have suggested that building that kind of different life might not even be possible within his current situation. There's a growing sense that what Harry wants, something simpler, more genuine, more connected to purpose, doesn't fully line up with what Meghan wants or what their current setup demands. Because that system runs on constant attention. It's about staying relevant, keeping the narrative going, and turning every possible angle into something marketable, including, as critics point out, the use of royal titles connected to their children. That gap isn't small, it's built into the structure, and no amount of clever messaging is going to fix something that deep. Now look at it from another angle, the polling. Camilla started out with some of the lowest approval ratings the royal family had ever seen. But over 2 decades, she slowly rebuilt her image through steady, low-key work. She's now sitting at 42%, and while that's not top tier, that 7-point jump shows something important. Consistent behavior over time can shift public opinion.
Financially, the couple are a laughingstock in Montecito. A really good example of how financially challenged they are. It's almost unheard of to buy a house in Montecito and just move into it, right? You buy a house and you do like a $7 million remodeling job, right? To make it all up to date. You don't take the sort of, we've seen the insides of the house. Yeah. It's hideous. It's absolutely hideous.
Harry actually starts in a stronger position than she did. There's still some leftover goodwill there, but matching that kind of turnaround would take serious patience, consistency, and real service. And it would be tough to pull off while tied to a system that depends on constant visibility and commercial pressure. The financial side makes all of this feel a lot more urgent. People around Harry likely see it clearly, even if he doesn't fully. Reports about a 5-year runway, an inheritance that's already been used, and a commercial setup not hitting expectations all point to growing pressure. Then there's the Montecito house, still not fully renovated, which raises eyebrows at that level. Add in speaking fees around $50,000 per appearance. Big money for most, but not enough to comfortably support the kind of overhead tied to their lifestyle. And suddenly the gap becomes hard to ignore. All of it adds up to something serious. A ticking clock that's getting louder. Because when the numbers stop working, choices stop being optional. At that point, it's not about preference anymore, it's about survival. That mansion, with its reported multi-million-dollar yearly security costs, may not stay sustainable no matter how much they want it to. And if that shift happens, then everything changes fast. What Harry's life looks like, what gives it meaning, what replaces the structure he left behind, those answers won't come from careful planning. They'll be forced by reality. Whether that leads to a comeback or a deeper slide depends on how those moments are handled. Real change only happens when there's real reflection. And so far, that 30% approval rating hasn't pushed that far enough. That Astrology post claimed the pressure would lift on April 25th, but multiple reports suggest the opposite. If anything, the pressure is still building, and it's not slowing down anytime soon.
No huge surprises. Elizabeth, still incredibly popular. Diana, still incredibly popular. Both departed. William, hugely popular. I mean, for any sort of modern figure of any kind, of 76% approval rating is nuts. Catherine, 75%. Actually, Princess Anne, always really viewed as an underappreciated asset. 70% support. King Charles, 60%. And then you go down to Camilla, 42%, Harry, 30%, Meghan, 20%, Andrew Mountbatten wins at 3%. But actually, maybe, Tom, some people have been talking up.
The Sussex Survivors Club is still talking, still sharing their side through journalists. The polling numbers haven't shifted. Harry at 30%, Meghan at 20%. The Montecito house still hasn't seen those expected upgrades. And that 7 hardest years narrative, no matter how real it feels to Meghan, doesn't match what others say they lived through during that same time. The astrologer might believe Meghan is a queen, ready to rise again after years of struggle.
He was to take a harder line on Harry and emulate what we know is William's opinion. I think he would see those poll numbers. I think they could easily go up to 65, 66, 67. Could he get to 70 if he really did the right thing on Harry? I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility. I think there's a huge wellspring of like we want to love Charles, we want to like Charles, we want him to do the right thing. We just need him to stop doing the idiotic things once in a while. You know, it'd be really helpful if he'd stop doing the idiotic.
Oh, yeah.
But those approval ratings paint a very different picture. And the people who left the Sussex operation in real distress, who hear that hardest years, claim, and can't believe it, are offering a perspective that's hard to ignore. Because their experiences don't come from headlines or curated posts, not from magazine features or perfectly timed uploads. They come from being inside that environment, trying to do their jobs, and leaving with something heavier than what they came in with. That's the version of those years that rarely gets center stage, but it's still being told quietly and consistently by the people who lived it. If you found this breakdown interesting, make sure to like, subscribe, share your thoughts, and drop a comment below. This conversation is far from over.